I met Jessica at a party at a friend's house. I remember as soon as I walked into the room, I immediately noticed her. She was so cheerful, constantly smiling. She was a primary school teacher at the time, and her kindness was immediately apparent. We quickly hit it off, and after that evening I couldn't stop thinking about her. A few days later we went on a date, and a month later I realized that she was the one I wanted to build a future with. Jessica moved in with me about 6 months after we met. It was an important step for me. I've always dreamed of a stable and lasting relationship, and with her I felt like it was really possible. We both wanted the same thing: a quiet life, a house with a garden, children in the future. We often talked about it in the evenings, sitting in our small kitchen with a glass of wine. 2 years later, I proposed to her. It was one of the best days of my life. We had a modest wedding, just our closest friends and family. We got married on the shore of a lake, and I always remember that day fondly. Standing there with her, I was sure that together we would go through everything and live a long and happy life. We moved to a quiet neighborhood outside the city. We bought a house that I really liked because it was in a quiet neighborhood and there were good neighbors. We spent our evenings together watching TV shows, cooking dinners, or just talking for hours. It was a perfect life, simple but happy. I felt like I had finally found my person. Jessica continued to work as a teacher, and I got a promotion at work. We were in no hurry to have children, but we often talked about how we would be ready in a few years. She was always supportive of me, and I tried to do the same for her. We planned our future, from vacations to how we would grow old together. Life seemed so perfect that I couldn't even think that anything could go wrong. A few years passed after our wedding, and our lives seemed to be as perfect as ever. But at some point, I started to notice that something had changed. Jessica started staying late at work more often, explaining that she needed to prepare lessons or help her colleagues with projects. At first, I didn't see anything special in this. She's always been a hard worker, and I was proud of her dedication to her job. But over time, I started to notice other things that bothered me. She would often take her phone with her to another room when someone called or received a message. We used to sit on the couch together for hours, but now she would say she was tired and go to bed early. Her attention to me seemed to be slowly disappearing. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just stress at work, I thought. But one day, when I dropped her off at school, she told me that she would be staying late with her colleagues in the evening to discuss a new learning project. This surprised me a bit, because she usually told me about such things in advance. Something in her voice was different than usual, but I decided not to make a scene and just wished her luck. She came back later that night than she had promised, but even that didn't bother me that much. What bothered me the most was that she was somehow aloof and silent. I asked her if she was okay, and she only briefly replied that she was tired. I wanted to hug her, as I always did, but she just shied away and went to sleep. At that moment, I felt that something was clearly wrong. I was worried, but I decided not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a difficult period at work. However, the feeling of anxiety began to settle deep inside me, and I couldn't get rid of it. Something had changed in our relationship, but I couldn't figure out what it was. One evening, I was sitting at home after a hard day at work when my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a normal evening. Jessica was working late again, so I decided to relax a bit by watching the news and drinking tea. I didn't expect anything important, but when I opened my phone, I saw a message from an unfamiliar number. It was just one sentence, without a signature or any explanation. "Your wife is cheating on you." I froze, staring at the screen. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake or perhaps a bad joke. After all, who could write such a thing? I was outraged that someone had dared to interfere in my life, and I was even ready to erase the message right away. But something in me stopped me from doing so. I sat in silence, digesting this information. For some reason, this message hurt me more than it should have. All the moments when Jessica had been acting strangely lately started to come to mind. I remembered how she had been hiding her phone, how she had been staying at work more often, how she had been avoiding being close to me. I used to push these thoughts away, trying to justify her tiredness or stress, but now everything started to take shape in a different way. I tried to calm myself down by repeating, "It's just a stupid report. There is no evidence." But I was already suspicious inside. I could feel a wave of anxiety gradually covering me, pushing out any calmness. I thought about who could have sent this message. Could it have been one of her colleagues, or perhaps someone who knew us personally? I couldn't find an answer. The only thing I knew for sure was that now I couldn't just ignore this signal. When Jessica came home later that evening, I tried to look calm. We talked as usual, but I couldn't stop thinking about that message. She was acting as usual, but I was seeing her completely differently. Her every move, every word seemed suspicious to me. I felt that something would change, and that it was only a matter of time. After I received that mysterious message, something inside me changed. I couldn't just forget about him and go on living the way I had before. All those moments when Jessica was acting strangely now seemed like more than just a coincidence. I decided that I had to find out the truth. Something in me told me that she was hiding more than what she was saying. The next morning, when Jessica left for work, I started acting like a real detective for the first time in my life. First, I decided to check her phone. I've always trusted her and never found it necessary to look at her messages, but this time I couldn't stop myself. However, her phone was locked with a code and I didn't want to arouse suspicion, so I had to give up on this idea. After that, I decided to check her computer. Perhaps she was corresponding via email or social media. I opened the laptop and started looking through her tabs in the browser, but everything looked normal, nothing suspicious. No messages or signs of infidelity. But I didn't give up. I knew that if there was a truth, it would definitely come out. For several days, I just watched her behavior. My suspicion grew stronger and stronger. I noticed that she always carried her phone with her, even when she went to the bathroom or kitchen. This seemed strange to me because she used to always leave it on the table. Every call she made now seemed suspicious to me. One evening, when Jessica said she was going to have to work late again, I decided to take another step and follow her. I waited for her to leave the house and quietly followed her in my car. She did head in the direction of her school, but on the way she suddenly stopped in a parking lot near a cafe. I parked a little further away and started watching. A few minutes later, a man approached her and they sat down together at a table. I couldn't see his face exactly, but it seemed like they knew each other well. They laughed, talked, and then left the cafe together and got into his car. That was the moment when my worst suspicions began to be confirmed. It hurt me to see it, but I couldn't draw a final conclusion yet. I decided to keep watching and not jump to conclusions. However, now I knew that this was not just a play of my imagination. Something was really happening, and I was close to finding out the truth. After several days of uncertainty and doubt, I couldn't take it anymore. Jessica continued to act suspiciously, coming home late, making secret phone calls, and the distance between us grew. I felt that something was wrong and decided to find out what it was. One day, when she said she was going to another work meeting, I decided to follow her. I quietly got into my car and followed her. She was not driving towards the school, as I expected, but to another part of the city. I was filled with anxiety. A few minutes later, she parked near a park. I parked my car further away, got out and followed her on foot, trying to remain inconspicuous. She headed deeper into the park to a bench where a man was already sitting. It was the same man I had seen earlier outside the cafe. I watched as they sat down next to each other and felt anger building inside me. Jessica put her head on his shoulder, and he gently hugged her shoulders. It was more than I could bear. Without thinking about the consequences, I went straight to them. My steps were heavy and determined. As I approached, I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my head and the tension in my voice. "I'm waiting for you at home, Jessica," I said sharply, full of anger, not believing my eyes. She looked up sharply when she saw me, and I could read shock and fear in her eyes. The man next to her stood up, ready to say something, but I didn't give him time. "Who are you?" I asked with a challenge, but I didn't expect an answer. Before he could say a word, I pushed him with all my strength in the chest. He was not expecting it, and the blow made him lose his balance. He fell to the ground, slamming loudly against the bench behind him. Jessica screamed and ran to him, trying to help him up. I stood there, clenching my fists, my breathing labored, and my head was buzzing with rage. I was overcome by an uncontrollable wave of anger and resentment. This was not just a betrayal, it was a devaluation of everything we had built together over the years. She stood up and tried to speak. "It's not what you think," but I interrupted her. "I'm waiting for you at home," I repeated coldly and left, not wanting to hear her excuses anymore. I had nothing more to say to either of them. I knew the truth now, and it hurt more than I could have ever imagined. I walked through the park, and every step seemed difficult. My head was buzzing with thoughts. Everything I saw, everything I heard seemed to be happening to me. But it was reality, and I couldn't hide from it anymore. I returned home, but the feeling of unease did not leave me. Everything inside was boiling with anger and pain. I threw my keys on the table by the door and sat down heavily on the couch. Thousands of questions were running through my head, but the one that tormented me the most was why. How could she do this to me after everything we had been through together? A few minutes passed, and I heard the front door open. Jessica came in. She was confused, but she tried to appear calm. I looked at her, and I no longer saw the person I had loved all my life. Her eyes did not have the sincerity that they used to have. I watched her in silence until she had the courage to come closer. "We need to talk," she said quietly, almost without looking at me. "Talk?" I couldn't help but be sarcastic. "Do you really have anything to say after everything that happened?" She sighed nervously and sat down on the other side of the couch. I could see her hand shaking, but I didn't care anymore. I was ready to hear the truth, even if it was painful. "Why?" I finally asked, looking her straight in the eye. "Why did you betray me? What happened that made you decide to do this to me?" She pressed her lips together nervously and looked away. She was silent for a few seconds and then finally answered, "I don't like you anymore." These words went through me like a knife. I felt my heart clench with pain. "You stopped liking me?" I repeated, not believing my ears. "And that's your answer? After everything we built together? After years of marriage?" She fidgeted nervously with her fingers, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't know how to tell you this. You're a good man, but I don't feel the same way about you as I used to. I didn't know how to end our relationship, so everything dragged on." Her words hit me even harder. Everything I had felt before seemed miserable compared to this wave of pain. She had long since lost interest in me, but she continued to live next door to me, pretending that everything was fine. And instead of just telling me about it, she chose a different path, the path of betrayal. "It was easier for you to betray me than to tell me the truth?" I barely managed to say. Anger and disappointment were overwhelming me with renewed vigor. "You didn't even give us a chance to fix it. I just didn't know what to do," she started to say, but I interrupted her. "You knew," I said coldly. "You knew what you were doing, and you made your choice. And now you have to live with the consequences." She tried to say something back, but I couldn't listen anymore. I had no more words, no more strength to continue this dialogue. I got up and left the room, leaving her sitting there on the couch, full of regret and fear. I needed to be alone to understand how to move on after all this. After that conversation, I left the room and closed the door behind me. My mind was racing with thoughts, and my heart was in pain. I couldn't stay under the same roof with her anymore. Her every presence around me from now on reminded me of the betrayal, of all those moments that turned out to be lies. I went to the bathroom, put my hands on the sink, and looked in the mirror. I didn't see myself in the reflection. I saw a man who had been destroyed by betrayal. I was going to do what I should have done even earlier. I didn't see any point in continuing this relationship when everything we had was destroyed. After a few minutes in the bathroom, I returned to the room where Jessica was still sitting. She looked exhausted and nervous, but I no longer felt anything but a cold emptiness for her. "We can't be together anymore," I said calmly but firmly. She looked up at me, but said nothing. It was clear that she realized where this was going. "I'm going to file for divorce." These words hung in the air like a death sentence for our relationship. Jessica nodded quietly, but her eyes were filled with tears. Maybe somewhere inside she regretted her choice, but it was too late. Too much pain had been caused, and I couldn't go on living a lie like that. "You can stay here tonight, but tomorrow you have to leave," I said, looking at her. She nodded, and I saw tears running down her face. But this no longer aroused my sympathy or pity. I was no longer the man I used to be. The betrayal had changed me forever. I went to the bedroom, leaving her sitting on the couch. It was hard for me to realize that our life together was over, but I knew it was the only right thing to do. I could not forgive her. I could not continue to live with a person who betrayed me so badly. Our story had come to an end. When the door closed behind Jessica, I felt a strange relief. It was the moment when everything that had been accumulating in me for the past week's anger, resentment, pain began to recede. Now I was alone, and a new life was opening up before me. A life without her, without betrayal, without lies. And although the feeling of emptiness still remained, I knew that I could now move forward. I stood by the window, looking out onto the street. The sun was slowly rising, illuminating a new day. And with this new day came the realization that life goes on. I no longer have to pretend that everything is fine. I don't have to live in constant expectation that something will go wrong. I was free from the burden of lies, and now there was only freedom ahead, even if at first it seemed bitter. Being in silence, I realized several important things. First of all, I realized that you cannot build a future on a lie. If there is no trust and respect in a relationship, then that relationship is doomed. Jessica could have told me the truth back when she realized she didn't want to be with me anymore, but she chose to cheat. It's her choice, and I can't change the past. But the biggest discovery for me was that betrayal does not determine my future. Yes, I went through pain and disappointment, but that doesn't mean my life stopped. I am no longer a man who can be destroyed by betrayal. I am stronger than I thought I was. Now that Jessica is gone, I have started to build a new life. It wasn't going to be easy. I would face trials, loneliness, and time to heal. But I knew I could do it. I immersed myself in work, began to communicate more with friends, and found new hobbies. Step by step, I was rebuilding myself. And now, a few months after the day Jessica left my home, I finally felt ready to move on. I no longer felt pain or regret. Yes, I went through dark times, but it made me stronger. I started to value myself more and realized that I deserve better. Life does not always go as we plan. Sometimes it deals blows we don't expect. But the most important thing is how we react to these blows. I have learned to let go and accept what I cannot change. And now, looking at my future, I see the light ahead, not the shadow of betrayal.